The UK's first ever farming strike is not just a protest. It's a stark warning shot across the bow of a government that seems dangerously out of touch with the realities of the agricultural sector. When British farmers refuse to supply milling wheat starting on Tuesday, they aren't just taking a stand against a tax policy. They are demanding a reckoning with the growing threats to food security, self-sufficiency, and the fragile state of British agriculture. This moment cannot be ignored. It's not simply an inconvenience to be glossed over with comforting statements about investment or future reforms. It is a crisis in the making, and the government's response thus far is entirely inadequate. The protest is a direct response to Rachel Reeves's inheritance tax raid, which will penalise farmers whose family businesses exceed £1 million in assets. The Chancellor's recent announcement, set to be implemented by April 2026, will make life significantly harder for farmers, forcing them to pay a 20% inheritance tax on agricultural and business property assets above this threshold, while still keeping the standard 40% for other sectors. This is a policy that shows a profound disregard for the men and women who work the land, producing the food that sustains the nation. How can we expect to protect British farms and ensure long-term food security when the government is actively discouraging the very people who feed us? The proposal to impose a 20% inheritance tax, with conditions that could see farmers burdened for 7 years post-handover, is nothing short of a betrayal of the country's agricultural heritage. The strike, which will see British farmers withhold milling wheat from supply chains, is a desperate, last-ditch effort to get the government's attention. And make no mistake, this isn't just about a few disgruntled farmers. The consequences of this strike will ripple through the entire food supply chain. Bread, hot cross buns, and other bakery goods, staples of British life, could soon be in short supply. The strike sends a clear message to the government. The country's food security is at risk. But if the government thinks it can ignore this protest and merely continue to lecture farmers about the benefits of their so-called reforms, it is gravely mistaken. We must face the uncomfortable truth. The government's proposed tax changes are a massive step backward for agricultural sustainability in this country. Farmers already operate on razor-thin margins, struggling against the weight of rising costs, unpredictable weather patterns, and the ongoing pressures of global trade. The government's investment in agriculture, while welcome, does not address the core issue. The reality is that the proposed inheritance tax changes will hurt farmers, especially those in the midst of trying to pass down family businesses to the next generation. What does the government expect farmers to do when faced with the choice of either taking on crippling tax burdens or selling off family land to pay for it? The situation is far more dire than any politician is willing to admit. British farming cannot be left to rot under the weight of governmental ineptitude and short-sightedness. The strike is a cry for help from the very people who ensure we don't go hungry. By focusing on the tax relief for agricultural assets above £1 million, the government fails to understand the bigger picture. This isn't just about wealthy landowners, it's about the future of British agriculture. Farmers, who represent the backbone of the country's food production, are already operating in a hostile environment. The strike is simply the first indication of a much larger issue. The government is pushing its own citizens toward food dependence on foreign imports, leaving the country vulnerable in times of crisis. Politicians, with their easy access to wealth and resources, will likely shrug this protest off as a small issue. They'll argue that farmers are simply being resistant to change. But that couldn't be further from the truth. What they are resisting is the systematic dismantling of a sector that has been at the heart of Britain for centuries. They are standing up for self-sufficiency, for the preservation of British farms, and for the families who have worked tirelessly to provide for us all. The government's response to these concerns has been feeble at best. Sure, there are promises of reform and support. But the truth is, these promises amount to little more than empty rhetoric. A government that takes pride in backing British produce, but fails to provide adequate support to the very producers it claims to champion is a government that is failing its people. The recent statements from the government, boasting about the £5 billion investment into farming over the next 2 years, ring hollow. The issue is not the size of the budget. It's how that money is being allocated and whether it reaches the people who need it the most. Farmers aren't looking for handouts. They are looking for policies that will ensure they can thrive and continue producing the food this nation depends on. It's time for the government to wake up. The strike is just the beginning. Farmers across the UK are sending a clear message. We will not stand by while you destroy our livelihoods, our industries, and our food security. If the government continues to ignore the cries of the very people who feed this country, It will only be a matter of time before the consequences are felt across the entire nation. It's not too late to reverse course, but the clock is ticking. And if the government is serious about protecting British farming and ensuring the future of food production in this country, it must take immediate action to halt the damage it is doing to the sector. The time to act is now.